The note was on the kitchen counter when I came back from my morning walk. Folded once, my name written on the outside in her handwriting. The same handwriting that used to sign birthday cards and grocery lists, and the back of our son's school permission slips. I stood there in my coat, still holding my gloves, and read it. I need you to leave. The house has been sold. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I read it twice. Then I set it down, walked to the window, and looked out at the yard I'd spent 31 years maintaining. The maple I'd planted the summer our son was born was starting to turn. Orange at the tips. It does that every September. I was 63 years old. I had driven school carpools and coached minor hockey and sat through every parent-teacher interview and never once, not once, thought I would be standing in my own kitchen reading a note that told me to leave. I turned the note over. On the back I wrote 2 words. Then I folded it and left it exactly where I'd found it. My wife got home at 4:15 that afternoon. By 4:22 my phone showed 39 missed calls. I should tell you who we were before I tell you what happened. Her name is Pauline. We met in 1989 at a mutual friend's barbecue in Oakville, Ontario. She was wearing a yellow sundress and arguing about the Blue Jays with someone she'd just met, and I thought she was the most alive person I'd ever seen. We were married 2 years later. We raised 2 children in the same house in Burlington. Our son, who is now 40 and lives in Calgary, and our daughter, who is 37 and lives 20 minutes away with her husband and our grandson. I retired early from civil engineering at 61 after a merger reduced our division. She kept working part-time at a dental practice, front desk, patient coordination, that sort of thing. We had the house, which we'd paid off in 2019. We had RRSPs and a joint investment account. We had a Subaru and a used truck I kept for hauling things, and a dog named Chester who slept at the foot of the bed. We were not, as far as I knew, unhappy. That is the part that I still sit with, not the anger, the confusion. I thought we were fine. I thought we were past the hard years and into something quieter and good. I thought the quiet was the good part. I was wrong about that. Or maybe she was wrong about it. I'm not sure anymore which one of us failed to say the thing that needed saying. And at this point, it doesn't much matter. What matters is what she did. 2 weeks before the note, a letter had arrived from a law firm I didn't recognize. Morrison and Talbot, out of Hamilton. It was addressed to Pauline. I left it on the counter. I didn't open it because it wasn't mine to open. I mentioned it to her that evening, and she said it was about her mother's estate still being settled. Her mother had passed 4 years ago. I had no reason to question it. I know now that the letter was confirmation of a sale. She had listed our house with a private listing service using a document I had signed 2 years earlier, a general power of attorney that I'd granted her when I was going in for a cardiac procedure. Routine, the surgeon had called it. I had signed it in the hospital parking lot, sitting in the passenger seat of the Subaru, and handed it back to her without reading the full document. She was my wife. I trusted her. That power of attorney had been used, apparently, to authorize the sale of our joint property. The buyer was a numbered company. The closing date was set for 6 weeks out. She had accepted an offer of $1.1 million on a house we had bought for $340,000 and improved over 3 decades with our own hands and our own money. I didn't know any of this when I read the note. All I knew was that she wanted me gone. The 2 words I wrote on the back of her note were, "Prove it." I didn't leave. That's the first thing I should say. I called our daughter that evening and she came over within the hour, her husband staying home with our grandson. She sat across from me at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea and said, quietly, "Dad, how long has this been coming?" I said I didn't know. She said she'd had some sense of it, that her mother had seemed distant since spring. I asked her if she knew anything specific. She said no. I believed her. That night I called a lawyer, not a family friend, not someone Pauline knew. I called a property and family law firm in Hamilton that I'd found through the Law Society of Ontario referral service. I got a voicemail, left my name and number, and went to bed in my own house. The next morning I met with a lawyer named, well, I'll call him my lawyer, because his name isn't part of this story. What he told me in the first meeting changed everything I thought I understood about my situation. The general power of attorney I had signed was valid. In Ontario, a general POA grants broad authority including over real property, unless it is specifically limited, which mine was not. However, he explained, there are restrictions. A POA cannot be used to benefit the attorney, meaning Pauline, at the expense of the grantor, and joint property with right of survivorship carries specific legal constraints. The sale, he said, was almost certainly voidable, but I needed to act quickly, before closing. He also told me to stop using the joint bank account. I went home. I did not confront Pauline. I transferred my direct deposit to a separate account I opened at a different branch. I made a copy of every financial document I could find, investment statements, mortgage discharge papers, property tax bills, renovation receipts going back 15 years. I scanned them at the library on Appleby Line and emailed them to myself and to my lawyer. Then I went home and made dinner, pork chops. She came in around 6 and we ate at the same table we had eaten at for 30 years, and neither of us said much. Chester sat between us and looked from one face to the other the way dogs do when they sense something wrong. It took my lawyer 4 days to untangle what had happened. The numbered company that had purchased our home was incorporated in Ontario 2 months earlier. Its 2 directors were Pauline and a man I'll call her partner, because that is what he turned out to be. He was someone she had met through the dental practice, a contractor who'd done renovations for the clinic, mid-50s, divorced, lived in Stony Creek. The plan, as best as my lawyer reconstructed it, was this: sell the house below market value to a company they both controlled, take the proceeds, and use them to purchase a different property together. The house wasn't going to a stranger, it was going to them, to her and him, and I was supposed to disappear into a 1-bedroom rental somewhere and not make a fuss. What she had not counted on was a caveat. My lawyer filed a certificate of pending litigation on the property within 6 days of our first meeting. That's a legal instrument that attaches to title and tells the world, this property is in dispute. Do not close this transaction. The sale could not proceed. Morrison and Talbot received the notice and, apparently, called Pauline immediately. That was the afternoon she called 39 times. I let them all go to voicemail. When I finally listened that evening, sitting in my truck in the driveway, Chester on the seat beside me, her voice moved through a range I hadn't heard from her in years. Confusion, then anger, then something that might have been fear. The last 3 messages were quieter. She asked me to call her back. She said we needed to talk. I called my daughter instead and told her what was happening. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Dad, what do you need from me?" I said, "Just keep showing up." She said, "Always." The mediation process took 11 weeks. I want to be precise about that, because people sometimes imagine these things resolve quickly, like a courtroom scene in a movie. They don't. There are letters and counter-proposals and long silences from the other side's lawyers, and afternoons when you sit in a Tim Hortons parking lot and eat a muffin and wonder if the person you built your life with was a stranger the whole time, or just became one somewhere along the way without either of you noticing. There were 3 things that came out of the process that I want to be clear about. The first was the house. The sale was voided, the CPL held, the numbered company dissolved, and the property was placed under a court-supervised sale process to ensure fair market value. It sold 3 months later for $1.24 million, $140,000, then her negotiated price. That difference, my lawyer noted dryly, was what her little arrangement had cost her. The second was the investment account. In the months before she left, she had made a series of transfers from our joint investment account, $12,000 here, $8,500 there, to a personal account I hadn't known existed. Total, just over $47,000. My lawyer brought in a forensic accountant to trace the transfers. When her lawyer saw the documentation, the mood in the room changed noticeably. Those funds were returned as part of the settlement. The third thing was something I did on my own, and I want to be honest about why I did it. Her partner, the contractor, had financing issues. He'd been carrying a significant line of credit with a private lender, roughly $280,000, at an interest rate that was, let's say, not competitive. The note was in arrears. The lender, a small investment company out of Burlington, was looking to sell the debt. My lawyer, who has a broader practice than family law, mentioned it in passing. I thought about it for 2 days. Then I bought the note. I want to be clear, I didn't buy it to destroy him. I bought it because I understood, finally, that the only language the situation had been speaking all along was financial. Pauline had made a financial calculation about our marriage. Her partner had made a financial calculation about the opportunity she represented. I simply made my own. When his lawyer raised the matter in mediation, calling it, with some heat, an act of intimidation, my lawyer responded calmly. In Ontario, debt assignment is legal and routine. There was nothing to adjudicate. He is making his payments. We have not spoken. I don't expect we will. I want to say something about my daughter, because she is the part of the story I am most grateful for and least able to explain without my voice going sideways. She came over every Tuesday evening during those 11 weeks. Sometimes she brought our grandson, and he'd sit on the kitchen floor and play with Chester, and I'd watch him and feel the kind of specific, uncomplicated love that grandchildren produce in you. Clean and without history, just presence. Sometimes she came alone, and we'd sit and she'd ask questions, and I'd try to answer them honestly. She asked me once, about 3 weeks in, if I was angry. I said yes. Not all the time, but yes. She asked if I was sad. I said that was harder to answer, that I wasn't sure if I was sad about what had ended or about the fact that I hadn't seen it ending. That there's a difference between grief and injury, and I was still figuring out which one I was carrying. She didn't try to fix that. She just nodded and poured more tea. My son called from Calgary when he heard. He was upset in the way men of his generation are upset about things involving their mothers, protective and confused, and trying to do the right thing by everyone at once. I told him he didn't have to choose sides. He said that wasn't what he was doing. I said I know. We talked for a long time. He flew out in November just to be here for a week. We watched hockey and ate badly and didn't talk about any of it very much, and that was exactly right. The settlement was signed on a Thursday in January. It was 14 outside. I drove to Hamilton, sat across a conference room table from a woman I had been married to for 31 years, and we signed our names to a document that divided what we had built into 2 equal portions and formally ended the marriage. She looked tired. I imagine I did too. She said, quietly, as we were putting on our coats, that she hadn't meant for it to happen the way it did. I said I believed that. I said I thought she'd meant for it to happen some way, just not that particular way. She didn't answer. Her lawyer put a hand on her elbow, and they left. I stood by the elevator for a moment and looked out the window at the parking lot and the gray January sky over Hamilton and thought, 31 years. I thought about the first apartment, the one with the radiator that clanged all night. The night our son was born, 3 weeks early, and I sat in the hospital corridor and ate a bag of chips because it was the only thing in the vending machine and I couldn't leave. Our daughter's wedding in Niagara-on-the-Lake, the way the light came off the water at 6 in the evening. The maple I planted, the way it turns orange at the tips every September. Some of that I am keeping regardless. I live now in a rental on the lake shore in Burlington, ground floor, 2 bedrooms, a view of Lake Ontario from the kitchen table. I wake up early, the way I always have. I make coffee. Chester has decided the couch is his, and I've stopped arguing about it. My daughter comes on Tuesdays. My son came back in March, and we drove up to Collingwood for a few days, and he seemed to relax in a way he hadn't in the fall. My grandson turned 4 in February, and he can now say my name clearly, which he pronounces with great ceremony, looking me directly in the eye as if confirming something important. I have not spoken to Pauline since January. I don't think about her every day. Some days I do. Some days I go for my walk along the waterfront and the sun is on the lake and a dog goes past and I think, this is actually fine. I'm actually okay. Other days are harder. That's the truth of it. But here is what I know. I did not leave when she told me to. I did not panic. I did not spend a single night in a parking lot or a motel. I stayed in my house with my dog, and I called a lawyer, and I documented everything. And I was patient, and I let the process do what it was built to do. The 2 words I wrote on the back of her note, "Prove it," were not bravado. They were a question. I genuinely wanted to know what she thought she had done and whether she believed it would hold. It didn't hold. The maple is in someone else's yard now. I drove past the house once, in October, when the leaves were at their peak. I didn't stop. I just looked at it from the street, the new paint on the front door, a child's bike on the porch that wasn't ours. I kept driving. The lake was ahead of me the way it always is in Burlington, at the end of every road that runs south. Wide and cold and going on longer than you can see. That felt about right. I've been thinking about what it actually takes to not fall apart when the ground goes out from under you. Not the legal stuff, though that mattered, and I'll come back to it. I mean the thing underneath the thing. The part where you're standing in your kitchen at 7 in the morning, coat still on, gloves in your hand, reading a note that tells you the life you thought you had has already been sold. That moment. What you do in that moment says something about who you've become over 60-odd years and whether any of it was actually built to hold weight. I didn't yell. I didn't drive somewhere and sit in a parking lot crying. I turned the note over, wrote 2 words, and put it back exactly where I found it. Not because I'm cold, because I'd lived long enough to know that the first thing you feel is almost never the thing you should act on. That's what I mean when I think about the kind of integrity that actually holds up, not the integrity of grand gestures or public declarations, the quiet kind, the kind that says, I'm not going to become something. I'm not just because someone treated me badly. Pauline made choices. Those choices had consequences. I didn't have to manufacture the consequences. I just had to stay steady long enough for them to arrive on their own. And that steadiness. I want to be honest, it wasn't easy. There were nights in those 11 weeks when I sat at that kitchen table alone and genuinely did not know what my life was going to look like. That's a hard thing to sit with at 63. You think by that age you know the shape of your days. You think the uncertainty belongs to younger people. It doesn't. It finds you regardless. What I had, and what I'm grateful for, was the clarity to think rather than react. I called a lawyer instead of calling her back. I documented instead of confronted. I learned what a certificate of pending litigation was and what it could do, and I used it, not because I'm particularly clever, but because I slowed down enough to ask the right questions and listen carefully to the answers. That kind of thinking, the patient, deliberate kind, is something you can choose, even when you're scared, maybe especially then. And then there was the getting up part, every morning, through all of it. Making coffee, taking Chester for his walk, showing up when my daughter came on Tuesdays, answering my son's calls from Calgary honestly, instead of just saying I was fine. That's not dramatic. It doesn't make for much of a story. But it's the thing that actually carried me through, the simple, stubborn decision to keep going one day at a time until the situation resolved itself into something I could live with. What I know now on the other side of it is that those three things held together: the decision to do right, even when no one would have blamed me for doing otherwise, the patience to think clearly under pressure, and the daily discipline of just continuing. Not one of them alone would have been enough. Together they were. The maple is in someone else's yard. The lake is at the end of my road. Chester is on the couch. That's enough.